أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آله طيبين الطاهرين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب الأسر والزمان أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome back to our commentary of Surah al-Hadid, this review of chapter number 57, the chapter of the iron of the Holy Quran. And this is session number 16 that we are delving into this evening to review the finer points of this chapter of the Quran, which was revealed to the Muslims in the city of Medina after the migration, maybe anywhere from a year to 2 years after the migration happened. And as we mentioned in our very first session, that the overall arching theme, again, of this chapter, which we always have to remind ourselves of, is the institutionalization of charity, of helping one another out. Helping, obviously, financially is one of the clearest ways of helping, but there are so many other ways that we can help one another out. You know, not only financially, but through our emotional support, through giving time to one another, and also through imparting knowledge to give one another of that which Allah has given to us, which is an obligation for those who have been given knowledge, is to share that knowledge with others. And I would say that not only knowledge, but even life experiences. So elders owe it to the youth, the young generation, to share with them what they have gone through, what they have seen, so that the youth can at least appreciate what the pioneers of our communities have gone through and struggled and had to do to get the community where they are at today. And today we want to look at some of those points in this very beautiful verse of Surah al-Hadid that I want to go over with us this evening. And we jump into the fourth factor within this chapter, which is verses number 20 and 21, under the sub-theme of why are not angels sent down to us? And we'll get to that in a later verse, but for today I just want to look at verse number 20 of Surah al-Hadid. And again, a reminder that we always have to have at the forefront of our mind when we read the Quran is that at least this chapter, because it was revealed in Medina, that this verse and these verses in this chapter was coming down to Muslims who were living in Medina. Again, they were already Muslims. Keep that in mind, please. However, what level did Allah consider their faith to be at is the prime question we have to ask ourselves. Not to poke at the people of the past, not to poke the companions of the Prophet, may God's blessings be upon him and his family, not to mock them or insult to them. No, we don't want to mock or insult the companions of the Prophet because we love them. They believed in the Prophet from the beginning. They sacrificed their life and their wealth and all that they had to preserve this religion. But we have to realize, brothers and sisters, that not all companions are at the same level. And not all Muslims, for that matter, are at the same level. And that includes you and I today. That these verses are speaking to you and I just as much as they were speaking to the Prophet's companions 14 centuries ago. So before we go and try and drill holes and engage in poking in other people's lives, we should begin by also looking at our own lives. Now, I don't mean that we shouldn't analyze history. No, as Muslims, we must be involved in studying history, in being impartial, unbiased when we review Muslim history. And all Muslims have to do this. Unfortunately, there are many Muslims who don't believe in history, who say, let bygones be bygones, don't drug up the past. But then I would say to them, and again, this is just aside from the main topic for today, but let me just say, if you're going to say that don't talk about history, don't talk about the companions of the Prophet or the wives of the Prophet or historical figures that we love and revere, then we should actually think twice about reading the Quran, because Quran is a book which talks about many historical figures. And some people might not like some of the things that Allah has to say. Does that mean we just throw the Quran away? Al-Yada billah? Or that we reject verses and we don't read them, we black them out, we remove them, or we just skip over them? You know, sometimes you see these government documents that are redacted. They black things out. Do we want to do that to the Quran? Because the Quran talks about historical figures sometimes in a very negative light. And it's a bitter pill to swallow, but the truth is bitter. So let us look at history, from a respectable position, from an analytical position, from a very impartial, unbiased way, to truly understand what Allah wants us to recognize from history. Today, in this discussion, I want to look at the very first issue, which is in verse number 20, which talks about the 5 features of the life of this world. Now, this is a very lengthy verse. We're going to review the Arabic and English, and then I want to go into a frame-by-frame or a passage-by-passage analysis to review these 5 features, because they're vital to us to understand so that we can navigate our lives in this world. So without further ado, let us have a read of the Arabic and English, and then I will actually go through and review each part one by one. Allah begins by saying, "I'lamu annama al-hayatu dunya." He says that know and understand that the present worldly life is but a certain number of things. He says, "La'ibun wa lahwun wa zinatun wa tafakhurun bainakum wa takathurun fil amwali wal awlad." 5 things. It's a play, it's a vain talk and ostentation, it's a mutual boasting among you, and it is a competition in wealth and children. So 5 things there: play, vain talk, ostentation, mutual boasting, and competition. And then Allah gives us a parable. He says, "Kamathali ghayth." It's like the rain that comes down. أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ. And the vegetation grows by it, pleases the farmers. Now here, we'll talk about this a bit later, that the word kuffar, although you and I usually use the word kafir and kuffar as a non-believer, a non-Muslim, actually one of the meanings of a kafir is a farmer. And we'll explain about that a little bit later on in our discussion. But Allah says, كَمَثَلِ الْغَيْثِ أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ. But this rain comes down, the vegetation grows, and the farmer gets happy at seeing his crops grow. ثُمَّ يَهِيجُ فَتَرَاهُ مُصْفَرًّا. But then the farmer is looking on and he sees it dries up, and you see the crops which were once green because of the rain and the lush moisture that was being provided, it turns yellow. ثُمَّ يَكُونُ هُتَامًا. And then it becomes like dry straw. Again, keep in mind the parable. The life of this world is five things. And Allah gives us an example like a farmer who plants the seed, the rain comes down, the crops grow, he doesn't harvest, it turns yellow, and then it becomes straw. And then what does Allah say? He says, وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابٌ شَدِيدٌ. However, in the world to come, the hereafter, there is a severe punishment. وَمَغْفِرَةٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرِضْوَانٌ. But there's also forgiveness from Allah, from God, and His good pleasure, which are everlasting. وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. And what is the life of this present world? Or whereas the present worldly life is but a transient enjoyment of delusion. Again, it's a very lengthy verse, and we could probably spend hours or days deliberating on each and every aspect of these 5 different stages of life, and we're going to review them very briefly tonight. We could review the parable in detail, and we're going to try to do some justice to this, but eventually we're going to have to sit down on our own and read this verse and reread it and think and reflect upon it and see where we come to in our understanding of it. With that, let me go to the analysis of it. The very first thing that Allah says is this world is a la'ib. Now, before I go to that, let me just mention that commentators of the Quran have stated that these 5 stages, this la'ib and lahaw and zina and tafakhur and takathur, that this can actually be thought of as being 5 stages of human life from age 0 to age 40, each one being about 8 years. So 0 to 8 is the first stage of life. 8 to 16, 16 to 24, 24 to 32, 32 to 40, and beyond. But the very first stage of life, or again, if we look at it in a chronological sequence, although we don't have to, it can also be, these could run parallel to one another in the life of a person. But if we look at it as a running consecutively one after the other, then that first stage of la'ib is, which is defined, let me define it first, is la'ib, as we can define it in this context as inattention. Any activity which has no benefit after it's finished. No actual benefit, right? I mean, children play in the sandbox or in the park, or as these children are playing, chasing bubbles, and it's fun. It's good for them to get out, get the fresh air, expend their energies, run around, stay fit, have fun with one another, enjoy nature, whatever. So there is benefit to it in a sense, but at the end of the day, for example, you chase a bubble and it pops. Or you go to the beach and you build a sand castle and the water comes and wipes it away. Or you play tic-tac-toe or snakes and ladders or Monopoly or any of these board games. There is some benefit to them, but at the end of the day, when you're done the game, you close it up, you put it away. There's no actual benefit you've actually accrued at the end of it. But it's a part of life. We all have to play, right? People play in different ways in different ages, right? It's like the English saying that the only difference between men and boys is the price of their toys. Children play with bubbles that cost them, cost $1, $2 to buy a container of the water to make bubbles. And when you get older, your toys are your new phone, your new tablet, your new, Corvette. They're all toys at the end of the day. The only difference between men and boys, as I said, is the price of their toys. So level 1 is inattention, is la'ib. And as I said, that inattention is la'ib is any activity that is no benefit, or it gives no benefit after it's finished. And so some scholars of Tafseer of the Quran have interpreted this, not that it's not based on hadith, so don't think that this is revelation or hadith is from the Prophet or the Imams. This is their understanding, and that's what the Quran is also all about, is to understand it at our level of depth. So they say that this is aimed at children from 0 to 8. They spend their initial stages of life in this world getting to know the world around them. And again, that's a requirement. They're getting accustomed to their own physical body, walking and talking and running and holding things and grabbing things and learning how to function, which is obviously a much needed thing to learn motor skills and learn these abilities. So again, I'm not saying there's no benefit, but for example, running after a bubble and it pops, okay, that's the end of it. But even in there, I would say there's lessons to learn. Just like the life of this world, we run after it and then we reach it and we go out to grab it, the dunya, and it just fizzles away in our hands, because that's the nature of this temporal world. It's a delusionary device, as Allah says at the end of this verse. So level 1 is, and we move on, is that this world is a la'ib. 0 to 8. From there, children begin to graduate to the next level. And Allah says this world is also lahaw, which is defined as amusement, something done to pass time, any form of amusement. And you see that when children are a young age, unfortunately now sometimes our parents are giving their children tablets and their own phones, and they're playing video games, which obviously there's much scientific evidence. You can read about the harmful effects of that on the mind of a child. But let's say they don't have access to that in 0 to 8. When they get older, they now are introduced to the world of technology and video games and television and all that has to offer to them. And so scholars now say that this is that second stage of life, if we take the verse in that perspective of 5 consecutive stages, from age to 8 to 16. Now you spend more time playing in more advanced games. Back in the day, you played in the sandbox. Today, you're sitting on the sofa playing a video game. Back in the day, you swung on a swing in the park. Now you're playing games where you're, God forbid, shooting enemy soldiers. Back in the days when you were a young child, you were intrigued by the smallest of things. Now it becomes more and more difficult to excite and entertain and keep a young man or woman's attention span. They have a very short attention span. So lahu is the second stage. Again, it's amusement to pass time, and it's a more advanced form of amusement compared to the 0 to 8 phase. So now we've moved from 0 to 8 to 8 to 16. From here, where does Allah take us? from the third phase, which scholars define as 16 to 24, which is zina. It's indulgence. It's a decoration. And how many times do we either experience this if we're at that age, or have we seen our youth, men and women, go through this phase of life where now they're finishing, or they're in high school, they're in grade 10, 11, 12, they're finishing high school, going into college or university, and now they begin to look a bit nicer, right? When you're young, you kind of just wore ripped, clothing and tattered shorts and shirt, and you didn't really worry about it too much. But now you're at a stage of your life where you're beginning to learn more, know a bit more about yourself. Maybe you're thinking about marriage, or you're at least, if not planning about it, it's somewhere in your mind. But this decoration phase is the next stage, and you see this in so many different ways. You see it in the clothing that the men and women will wear. They'll spend hundreds or thousands on designer labeled clothing. You'll go get your haircut, where most people will spend $15 on a haircut, $20 on a haircut. Some of the men will spend $50, $60, $100 on a haircut. It's not unheard of. And our women as well will go to the hairstylist, to the beauticians, get their manicure, their pedicure, get this done and that done, and spend hundreds of dollars in one session. The young men will want to, for example, indulge and buy a car. And they will, and I've seen this, and I'm sure we've all seen this on television, some TV shows where people will spend thousands of dollars, not on the car, but on the rims of the tire. The car might be worth $5,000, and they'll spend maybe $2,000 or $3,000 on rims to make the car look nice, or drop it down a couple of inches, or put a louder muffler on the car, or a unique paint job, or a wrap of the car, and a nice stereo system. Right? So they're indulging in zina. They want to decorate, adorn themselves and what they have around them. And again, this is if we look at it in the progression, or maybe the regression of humanity, this is the third stage, which scholars say, again, not based on hadith or ayat of the Quran, it's their understanding of the world. This is seen in the older teenagers and young adults aged 16 to 24. Again, they're trying to impress the opposite gender at school, or maybe they have a job. Or when they go out, right, you see all the new clothing that's always coming out, the new styles, the new haircuts that are always, there's something new always happening in the fashion industry and in the hairstyle industry. They begin to talk in a certain way, using obviously the common lingo. They begin to walk even in a certain fashion, right? They look at the way that their so-called heroes walk, and they emulate all of these little, quirks of their life. They're indulging this stage of zina, of decoration, of adornment. Is this right or wrong? That's not up to us to decide, but we have to recognize that there are limits in Islam. Why you're doing certain things? Are you doing it solely to attract the opposite attention, the attention of the opposite gender rather, for haram, impermissible purposes? There's obviously a problem with that. It's not a problem to look good. We always want to look good, and Islam encourages us to dress nice, to smell nice, to look presentable, right? The Prophet we're told he would, make sure he combed his beard and combed his hair before he went out to meet his companions. He ensured his clothing was clean. He ensured he smelled good. These are things that all of us could learn. Sometimes, as a side note, we go to the mosque sometimes, back before the mosques were shut, and you're praying Jamaat prayers, and you go to shake the person on your right or left hand side's hand after the prayers. And unfortunately, some people don't believe in good hygiene. They don't believe in, smelling nice. How much more can I say? I think you know where I'm getting at. Some people don't believe in combing their beard, or keeping a clean beard, or keeping a nice head of hair. Right? Hadith tell us that if you want to grow your hair out long, that's okay. But the hadith are clear that if you can't take care of it, shave it off. Right? And we have to recognize this, brothers and sisters, that if you can't maintain a lengthy beard or a nice head of hair, then don't come to the mosque disheveled and a mess. Comb, clean yourself up, or cut the hair short so it's easier to manage. And again, there are hadith about all of this. The point being is that this is a stage of decoration, of adornment, of zina. If it's done for the right reasons, that's well and good. If it's done for the negative reasons, that is where we need to change and recognize that we may be doing something impermissible, right? Like sisters, for example, because I talked about the men, let me just talk to the sisters for a moment. Women that will go out wearing makeup, excessive makeup. This is forbidden. There's no two ways around it. I'm not being hard or strict or an authoritarian or an extremist in Islam. You can look at the rulings of the scholars. You can even go further than that. Look at the verses of the Quran where how Allah talks about this, right? Women who apply excessive perfume when they leave the home. I'm not saying don't smell good or, don't, to ensure that you remove body odor. But those women, for example, who wear that perfume that, excessively to maybe attract men towards them, there are hadith about them, what their outcomes will be. And I don't want to go into that. That's a separate discussion in all on its own. But just to recognize the fact that, yes, Islam wants us to look good and presentable and respectable. But there's a fine line between that and, doing things to attract the opposite gender. So level 3 is the stage of zina. From here, where do we go? We go to tafakhur, vanity, boasting among one another for property, for cars, for bling, right? For the nice jewelry, the nice watches that people spend thousands of dollars on. People that I've met who spend thousands on a watch. And not just one watch, but multiple watches in their collection. Right? They may say, well, this is an investment, and definitely I won't doubt that. That, maybe you're buying watches just like people buy real estate property as an investment. You buy land and you sit on it for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years, and land will always increase in value. So some people buy watches or some, something like that, some jewelry, not as a show off or a boast, but they buy it. It's an investment because they know in a couple of years they can turn around and maybe make a huge profit. But those who are engaged in tafakhur, vanity, just buying to show off, my friend got a BM, I'm going to one-up him and buy a Mercedes-Benz AMG. Or he bought a Jaguar, or they bought a Lexus or a Range Rover, or whatever they're engaged in. And you're buying more and buying more, not because you need it or want it or for an investment, but it is just to boast amongst one another. And scholars say that this is that age of 24 to 32. Those immature adults, we can call them. Right? They're still not fully at the level of recognizing and knowing their responsibilities and all of that of life, but they've graduated from university, let's say, because you may have entered university around age 18 or 19. You've done 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You've graduated. You may have gotten yourself a good job. Finished school. You got your job. You're paying off your mortgage. You're paying off your loans, rather. You've maybe bought your first house. You bought a car. Now you're in a competitive age bracket. You're looking for a spouse. Right? So you're dressing nice. You're looking nice. You're flexing what you've got. You're showing off your bling. And this is what many people do, unfortunately, both here in the secular world and also in the so-called Muslim countries. Young men are doing this. Right? They maybe don't have the money that we have, the expendable income that we have, but whatever they do have, unfortunately, they're going the same route because this is a human phenomenon. It's not limited to the West or the East or the Muslim or the non-Muslim or the white or the black. It is everybody. Everybody who doesn't know who they are. Everybody who doesn't really know their creator or their prophet or their divinely appointed leaders and who are just being led like sheeple. So tafakhur is the third stage, or fourth stage actually. Boasting amongst one another. And then where do we go from there? We go to level 5, where we've made it finally. Right? We've gone through the playground, we played the video games, we've gone through high school, we've gone through university. We have graduated, we're competing with one another in terms of wealth, in terms of whatever status. We're boasting amongst one another, driving to the mosque in our brand new Merc or BM or maybe a Ferrari if we've made it that well. And now we get to the last stage, age 32 to age 40, and obviously beyond till death. Till death do you part with your wealth. Proliferation, takathur. People competing for more wealth, a bigger family. How many times do you see these bumper stickers and posters? If I had known grandchildren were so much fun, I would have had them first. Right? At one time, people boast, oh, I have 2 kids, I have 3 kids. Or if they don't boast, they just mention it. And then they'll boast, yeah, my one son's a doctor, one's a lawyer, one's an engineer, one's a this, one's a that, one's a pharmacist, I don't know, whatever other worldly professions are out there that people like to boast about. And then they have grandchildren, and there's like, yeah, I have 12 grandchildren, 18 great-grandchildren, and this many great-great-grandchildren. And you see this in the papers sometimes in the obituaries when people die. And they'll say that this person died and they are survived by their 4 children and 12 grandchildren and this many great-grandchildren and so on and so on and so on. This proliferation, takathur, fil amwali wal awlad, in wealth and children and family. And this is the 5th stage, and it goes on until when? Until you're 6 feet under. And then on your tombstone, it just has your name, your birth date, and your death date. And that's all your tombstone has. Name, birth date, death date, maybe a verse of the Quran. Nothing more than that. It doesn't say here lies, Mr. Hajj so-and-so or Mrs. Hajjia so-and-so who leaves behind 5 children, 19 grandchildren, 32 great-grandchildren, who leaves behind a house in the lower mainland of Vancouver or in the elite subdivision in Toronto, and they had 4 cars and they had property in this country. It's all gone at that point, brothers and sisters. So proliferation, takathur, competing for more wealth and family. This is seen, again, based on scholarly opinion, from age 30 to 32 to 40 and beyond. Now you've got your career is done. You've gotten married, you've had your kids, your career is on a good path. Now you're competing with people in your age bracket, bragging, as I said, about all of these bragging rights that now you've earned, you think, because you've got kids and they've procreated and had more kids. So now you for some reason are bragging that you've got so many kids, or you're bragging that you have so many grandkids. Well, you did nothing to bring those grandkids into the world. It was your children who got married and they had children. You just happened to be around when their children were born, right? So you've done nothing to really boast about it. As I said, that we move on with the parable actually. Allah says, كَمَثَلِ غَيْثٍ أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ. It's like when rain comes down and the vegetation grows by it, pleasing the farmer. Now, Allah uses the word kuffar here, not in the meaning that you and I consider it to be a non-believer, but rather because the root word kafara, it literally means in the dictionary to cover. So if you look in an Arabic dictionary or Arabic English dictionary if you want, under the root letters kafara, you'll see it means to cover, to hide. To be irreligious or an infidel is a secondary opinion. But a kafir, or a farmer rather, is known as a kafir because what does he do? Or what does she do? They take a seed, they put the seed in the ground, and they cover it with dirt. That act of covering over with dirt is to cover, kafara, because they're covering it over. So when we call a non-believer a kafir, we're saying that they have the seed of faith in their heart. They were born with that seed of true belief in the one true God. But they cover it over with the dirt of polytheism, of worship of other than God, of disregarding God. So a kafir is one who covers over the truth. And as Allah says, the kuffar in this verse is a farmer. So from here, where does Allah take us in this parable? He gives the example of those 5 stages of life. He says, now think about the job of a farmer. He plants the seed. The rain comes. It grows the crops. The farmer becomes happy. Right? Just like in our life, we're born, we have fun, we get an education, we get a job, we have kids, we become happy. Then what does Allah say? ثُمَّ يَهِيجُ. But then the farmer, he's just sitting around looking out his window, looking at the crops. He sees them, yahiju, they dry up. ثُمَّ فَتَرَاهُ مُصْفَرًّا. And then you see them turn yellow. So the farmer's just sitting there, twiddling his thumbs. He's done all of that hard work for, weeks and weeks and weeks of tilling the land, of prepping the soil, of buying the seeds, of putting everything in place, of planting the seeds in the ground, whether by hand or by machine, fertilizing, watering, the irrigation system is running, and then the crops grow. He's happy, and he's sitting there looking at it, looking at it, looking at it. They're drying up, they're wilting away, they turn yellow. He's not doing anything. ثُمَّ يَكُونُ هُتَامًا, and then they become like straw. There's like just straw that you see whenever you drive, maybe in the country, around your house in the countryside, you'll see crops, and if they're not a well-trained farmer, they're not going to be harvesting, but you see them turning to straw. So from here, what we have to realize is this parable that Allah has given is very interesting, obviously, for many, many reasons. A farmer would plant the fields for a purpose, correct? I mean, a farmer is not going to waste time and resources and thousands of dollars to plant. Right? Is his purpose just to grow and let it sit in the field and go bad? Of course not. You go and talk to a farmer and they'll tell you why they do what they do. He looks forward to the harvest. He can harvest the crops, sell them in the market, earn money, or he can feed his animals if he has livestock. He could feed his family, sells it, makes money, pays off his bills, and gets ready for the next season. And as believers, we have to ask ourselves, what is our purpose on earth? Are we being deceived by the material world around us? Do we plant our seed, have children, just to see them grow, and we don't, for example, learn from this? We don't benefit from it spiritually? We just become like the farmer, and we just let it grow, 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 and then it destroys itself? No, we have to recognize the fact, brothers and sisters, that we have been created for a greater purpose than just this material world, this temporal world. And that's why I say that we can use this world, but don't let the world use you. We can live in this world, but don't let the transient material world live within you. We can benefit from this world, brothers and sisters, to get to the world to come, but never let this temporal transient world benefit from you. You be the master and let the world be your slave. As the poet says, are you a slave to what made man, or are you a slave to what man made? We have to recognize the fact that we are not to be slaves of the system. We're not to be slaves of corporate America or corporate Canada. We're not to be slaves of online shopping. We're not to be slaves of fashion, brand name jewelry or cosmetics or apparel or cars. We're not meant to be slaves of all of that. But unfortunately, people have become slaves of all of these things. We are made to be slaves of Allah. And this verse shows us, and I'll end with this last point or two, that we have to recognize the fact that those stages of life are just that, stages. We should never be stuck at any of them, whether the 0 to 8 or the 32 to 40. Right? We keep moving on in life, but recognizing the bigger picture, where we came from, where we're going, what is our purpose in life. And let me end with this last point, as we end with this verse actually, where Allah says, وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابٌ شَدِيدٌ, that if you don't change your ways, if you don't change your life, in the hereafter there is a severe punishment for you. For those who just live life in those 5 stages and are just busy playing and having fun and looking good and competing and rivalries and sibling rivalries and community rivalries and wealth rivalries, if you just live that kind of a life and you're not focused on the world to come, on the big picture as they call it, if you're not thinking out of the box as they say, then there is adabun shadid for you. وَمَغْفِرَةٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرِضْوَانٌ, but there's also forgiveness from God and His good pleasure. So it's up to you to decide, what do you want? Do you want adab or maghfirah? Do you want punishment or forgiveness? Do you want a life in hell or a life in heaven? Do you want stress and anxiety in this world, or do you want peace and tranquility in this world? Do you want to let the world use you, or do you want to use the world? Do you want the world to leech off of you, or do you want to leech off of this world for the world to come? Do you want the world to take over your heart, or do you want to take over the world with your heart, with your love, with your compassion, with your kindness, with your submission to Allah? Allah tells us at the end of the verse, I'll end with this last point, وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. What is the life of this world except a transient enjoyment of delusion? It's a pastime. It's something that we do just to move on. And we have to use this world, brothers and sisters. I'll end with this, that we have to use this world to get to the world to come. There's no other way around it. But we don't let the world use us. That's the goal of this verse, and that's the goal of this discussion for today, is not to be deluded by the world. Yes, it's beauty. Yes, it's glitter. Yes, it's glamour. Yes, it's fame. Yes, it's popularity. But there is something much better at the end, which is the forgiveness of Allah and His pleasure. What more can you and I ask for than the Ridwan of Allah? We close, and we will continue in our review of chapter 57, Surah al-Hadid, in our next sessions as we continue and we get closer to the end of this beautiful chapter of the Quran. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.